This is not a series about games you haven't heard of. This is a series about games everyone has heard of. Games that everyone has an opinion on, regardless of whether they've played them or not. Games whose actual qualities have been buried in a narrative, whether good or bad. Games that everyone always makes the exact same comments about. Games that are in desperate need of a second opinion. Okay, that looks good, and... Oh, hi everybody! Dr. I. Coleman here with a PhD in Paco. This week's episode of Second Opinion was guest written by Jay Petrequin. Thank you very much, Jay. Always a pleasure to have you write for the show. He just sent over the script, and I'm looking at it now. Metroid Other M? Jay writes, as both of my previous guest entries on Second Opinion involved pointing out the flaws in well-celebrated games, it seemed time to tackle an oft-hated game and defend its strong points. And what better choice for something everyone hates than Metroid Other M? I got neck-deep in the discourse on this one way back when it came out, and sweet Christmas were there a lot of feelings being flung around. People not only hated the narrative of Metroid Other M, they completely despised the entire game. There was a good amount of controversy over its gameplay and presentation as well, but the big problem with the criticism of Other M during its launch back in 2010 was how hyper-focused it all was on the game's narrative. Not only do I feel that the game's story is actually worth more than it gets credit for, I think that a lot of people have let the narrative lead them away from a deeper look at the game design and mechanical choices that should be what Metroid Other M is all about. Is Other M a top-tier entry in the series? No. No, it's not. It's really not. But it does make me sad to see it written off as a failure when it actually did quite a bit right. So let's start with the perspective check. It's early 2010 and you're a cool teen or young adult who thinks that Metroid Other M game there looks pretty badass. That Team Ninja Squad, they sure seem to know what they're doing. You're sure this will be just like the Metroid games you've come to love over the last few years. You hear that? That's the sound of us reaching some vital context, because the near decade before Other M's release was the era of Metroid Prime. Starting on the GameCube and making their way to the Wii, this trilogy had been the entirety of Samus's adventures in 3D space up to this point. The three Prime games, 4 if you count that weird DS one, are beautifully crafted, but they make a big paradigm shift mechanically from what Metroid had first become known for. Goodbye 2D platforming action and exploration of vast ant farm-style networks of passages and rooms. Hello, first-person shooting, puzzle solving in worlds with more complex layout and playstyle that could be more easily marketed to kids devouring the early Halo games like a never-ending first-person buffet. It's no wonder then that so many were disappointed when Metroid Other M came out because it wasn't made for them. No, Other M was made far more as a love letter to and revival of the design sensibilities in Super Metroid, and, more critically, Metroid Fusion for the Game Boy Advance. Now, I'll admit a bit of personal bias here, while also trying to bridge it into the conversation. Metroid Fusion is my favorite Metroid game. I think that from a design perspective, it's pretty much exactly neck and neck with Super Metroid, which is ironically the other series entry most closely tied to Other M. What I think gives Fusion an edge is its sense of simultaneous vastness and isolation, as Samus explores a series of biomes in a massive science vessel where something has gone horribly wrong. Funnily enough, this is the same kind of setup Other M attempts. Perhaps more importantly, Fusion is the original point of inception for the character of Commander Adam Malkovich, the man responsible for one of the two main issues people often have with Other M's story. So, Samus travels to the bottle ship, monologuing about how she can't stop thinking about the baby Metroid that died for her, and yes, we're going to get to that, don't worry. She meets up with a squad of Galactic Federation soldiers, a veritable Federation force, if you will, only to find that their commanding officer on site is the very same Adam Malkovich, the man Samus herself served under during her time in the Federation before deciding to kick it on her own as a cool orange-wearing bounty hunter. She decides to operate by the Federation squad's rules, including Malkovich's orders when it comes to what she's authorized to use in the old Chozo super arsenal. And don't get me wrong, I see the argument for this being a straight-up stupid way to limit her powers at the get-go. But when that plot point came up, I was actually happy because the decision made total sense based on Samus's history with Commander Malkovich. In Metroid Fusion, Samus goes to Biologic Space Laboratories, a space station overtaken by a parasitic virus taking the form of countless forms of alien life from all across the Metroid series. She is accompanied by a computer system meant to aid in mapping the place and supplying her with any relevant information about what to expect within the facility's different self-contained biomes. Fusion was one of the few pre-Other M Metroid games to give Samus much in the way of narrative voice, and even then only through bits of monologue in elevators and in occasional conversation with the computer's AI as she travels. She comments that it reminds her of her old commanding officer, and near the end she learns that memory isn't fleeting. The whole game, she's actually been talking to Adam Malkovich's consciousness copied into AI form. Samus isn't written as desperate for a reunion with Malkovich, but we know that he died a sacrificial death that Samus still carries and thinks about. In Other M, a lot of players familiar with Fusion went in assuming, correctly as it turns out, that we would witness Commander Malkovich's death firsthand. And after having a better idea of Samus's past with the Commander and how much he obviously meant to her, I was happy to follow his rulings. Samus choosing only to use weapons by his authorization, just like the rest of his squad, is a totally sensible choice given the parts of the Metroid story which Other M is drawing from. But no, I'm not going to pretend that he doesn't wait far too long to authorize most of them. That stuff still sucks, especially when you're going through the lengthy, lava-soaked portion of the game, and I'm not going to defend it. Hey, Mr. Malkovich! I've had my armor glued to my goddamn skin from how long I've been in here. Can I please use my Varia before I liquefy? That'd be nice. This is a power suit, not a soup kettle. But no, even though Malkovich possesses some strangely sloth-like qualities with his authorizations, Samus's choices surrounding them aren't actually out of place at all, but slide into the bigger narrative connection Other M and Fusion maintain. The same is true in many other places. In fact, the iconic nightmare boss from Fusion even shows up, not once, but twice in Other M's third act. The game's overall story, while a bit goofy and with some loose threads, is at its core a well-fitting part of a core Metroid tenet. Its story, over the course of things, is largely about genetic experimentation, playing God with mysterious science, and creating things that go berserk and eventually slaughter everyone. The story it weaves in that vein has more characters running around than usual, but creates some cool science fiction conspiracy all the same. Something else I really like about Other M and Fusion is that their tones are similar to that of the original Alien film. The alien threat in that film is initially seen as something that we could assume all of humanity once killed, but the central characters eventually discover that the company they work for sent them to capture the xenomorph all along. The company cares about it more than it cares about them. Like Fusion before it, Other M draws heavily from the Alien films, and it works. I'll even argue that the eventual reveal of MB as an antagonist via Mother Brain Vessel is a clever twist that doesn't stand out as out of place with anything else going on in that point in the lore. Hell, this is a series whose entire narrative is pinned on different races using the Metroids as bioweapons and going to any lengths to get their hands on more. So is the late game twist of Other M really so shocking? It can't be ignored though that Other M has some horrendous writing problems when it comes to Samus's personal narrative. They make the inexcusably lazy, narrow-minded, and yes, sexist choice to turn most of her presence in the story into a blithering dialogue about motherhood, and feeling a connection to the baby Metroid that died to protect her at the end of Super Metroid. To make it worse, the American voice actress they chose has all the emotional range of a dead space pirate. From her generally poor writing to the famously abysmal Ridley cutscene, where Samus is so paralyzed with fear from facing an enemy she's killed 4 times that she indirectly causes another character's death, it's true that all of this is point-blank bad writing. But it doesn't mean that the rest of what's there is likewise. Other M's overarching story is solid, even if it's infected by a horribly written protagonist. Now, let's do something real dang novel here and talk about the actual gameplay of this dang video game. Other M is built closer to its 2D brethren, mostly, and combines third-person platforming action with the magical and futuristic addition of the third dimension. And it works. As someone who grew up playing the older 2D Metroid games long before I entered the GameCube world of Metroid Prime, I firmly feel that the way Other M was designed is the perfect next step in developing a new series entry which, again, tries harder to keep the spirit of older games alive more than it does its contemporaries. But you say, what of the first-person mechanic? The first-person switch for using missiles and other arsenal components does feel awkward at first, but it's actually a genius use of the limited scope the team chose to work with in the form of the old hold the Wiimote sideways method. The action of Other M is really impressive in this regard. Metroid has always been known for using atmosphere to add tension to larger battles, and while Other M mostly does this through presentation, it also does so with the manipulation of cognitive flow. Having to halt in movement to use certain high-caliber weapons creates a repeated 2-part rhythm in combat. The player knows that they have to use rockets to shoot Nightmare's face mask off to reveal the slimy Shrek leavings within, but doing so fills them with a little more panic and tension because they know they're leaving themselves more vulnerable, even just for a moment, in order to take advantage of the equal vulnerabilities in front of them. A pretty out there example of something else like this is 2015's Splatoon, which maintains a two-step flow of blasting ink everywhere until the well runs dry, then sinking down into the colored mess and hoping an opponent doesn't smear over it and splat your day up. A lot of other games do stuff like this, but Other M doesn't get enough credit for how well it pulls it off. So again, I'm not going to try to use I. Coleman's sultry voice to claim that Metroid Other M is anywhere near the best Metroid game, or even in the upper half if we were going to make some kind of arbitrary list. But I will absolutely use those silky vocal cords to help me state that despite Other M's faults, despite the sexism and laziness in its portrayal of Samus, and despite how alien it understandably felt to players only familiar with the series' reinvigorating Prime games, despite all of that, Metroid Other M has ambitious ideas that pay off far more than the game will probably ever get credit for. No other Metroid game plays like it, before or since. No other Metroid game combines more old-school level design with perspective play the way that it does. And no other Metroid game puts such a frankly fascinating amount of effort into playing a very genuine and spirited homage to what is probably one of the less well-known previous games. They didn't just make this a prequel to Fusion, they put a lot of love into making it so. Team Ninja did make mistakes when they made Other M, but they also made one undeniably bold choice. They could have capitalized on the Metroid Prime name. They could have seen what a defibrillator those games were to the Metroid name and tried to replicate it. But they didn't. They made a gamble. Did it pay off? Not for their image, maybe. But for the game itself? Absolutely. Godspeed, Captain Malkovich. You glorious prick. Well, there you have it. Maybe Other M isn't really the worst Metroid game. Although it's certainly the worst title for any of them. I mean, you really couldn't think of a more clever anagram of mother than Other M. But nonetheless, it's a game that maybe got more hate than it deserved. At any rate, that's Jay's professional opinion. Still not sure if it's mine. My favorite Metroid game is obviously Federation Force. Thanks for watching this episode of Second Opinion, and thanks again to Jay Petrequin for writing it. If you want to hear more from Jay and I, why not check out the Hey Poor podcast? It's really funny, and it's available on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever podcasts are sold. If you have a game you think needs a second opinion, be sure to let me know in the comments, and there's a good chance your idea will be covered on the show. New episodes go up every Friday night. If you know someone you think would like Second Opinion, please tweet about it, or share it on Facebook, or just spread the word. Every extra view proves the show is viable, and ensures that I can make more episodes. Until then, stay professional, stay opinionated.